REWRITTEN! All he could do was watch. It was dark out, the sun having already set hours ago and dunking them under a starry black dome. The forest was anything but quiet, the shuffling, sniffling, crying noises all mixing together into an anxious pudding. There were cicadas, frogs, mosquitoes. Babies and children were wailing pitifully, the adults trying to shush them. Everybody was moving back and forth, either pacing, moving supplies around, or trying to send messages to people who were separated from them. Lion, a longtime pet of Stephen's, was helping where he could too, the mute creatures seeming to know, instinctually, the fragile states of the humans. It took orders from Lars like it understood English, carrying them out diligently and stoically, communicating with him with a flow of efficiency as the teen organized Beach City from the Sun Incinerator, his starship. Everybody was accounted for. Nobody was hurt enough to be dead by morning. The poofed gems had enough time to reform by now. It had only been about an hour since they'd stopped their fleeing, because they felt like they'd probably gotten far enough and they needed to properly tend to the wounded as soon as they could. The diamonds were surrounding the clearing that Beach City had stopped at, surveying them with their sharp pupils, glimpsing anxiously up at the vast horizon every few minutes. They kept all the injured people inside Lars's ship. Luckily, there was just enough room there to fit all the victims as well as the doctors that worked at Beach City's hospital before this. Though they lacked professional equipment, they tried to patch them up the best that they could. But it all might as well have been the buzzing of a fly. The only sound that Greg was focused on was his son. He could hear him. Well, no, that wasn't new. Everyone could hear him. In fact, anybody not preoccupied with settling down was staring off at the distant horizon, miles and miles away, watching the six-legged reptilian silhouette as he trampled everything in his path. But everyone else just heard the feral snarling and roaring of an animal gone rabid. Greg heard his son, Stephen. He could hear him crying in panic and disorientation and pain. Stephen was scared and lost. And now nobody was around to help him. Greg couldn't talk to his son. He couldn't pull him into a hug, tell him it was all right, and play him a song on his guitar. Greg couldn't do anything but watch his agony as Stephen stumbled around in blind confusion, miles and miles away. Greg wasn't unfamiliar with these feelings of helplessness. In fact, it happened almost every time the gems went out on missions. He was just an old, balding human. He couldn't fight. But this was different than just knowing that there was no way for him to cross into the gem world to protect his own son. This was a matter of how Greg had failed as a father. He could still freshly remember one of the last proper conversations that he had with Stephen. "My problem isn't that I'm a gem. My problem is that I'm a universe!" He thought that Stephen had scared him then whenever he'd ripped the steering wheel out and crashed the van, but that was nothing compared to what was happening now. The last few days had been a swirling mess of sleepless nights as he walked all around Beach City, calling for him, asking people if they'd seen him, trying to get a hold of his phone, only catching tiny glimpses of him as he passed by, being brushed off, and then finding him days later in even a worse state than before. He wished that he had done something more. He wished that he'd put his foot down and forced him to stop and tell him what was happening, instead of thinking that maybe Stephen just needed space to figure things out. Clearly, the way that he figured them out was the wrong way, and Greg hadn't been there to help him fix it the right way. Whatever had been going on with Stephen, Greg had failed as a father to protect him from it. This wasn't just him being hurt by a corrupted monster. This was Stephen becoming a corrupted monster. When a gem loses their mind, they get corrupted. It's a physical condition, one that is treatable and then preventable after fixing whatever caused their corruption in the first place. And if his own son managed to get this bad without Greg doing anything to stop it, he was the worst dad in the world. I just can't wrap my head around it. Greg jumped, snapped back to reality by the voice. He turned to see Lars, a friend of Stephen's, approaching. His pink complexion glowed faintly in the moonlight. He'd been taken to Homeworld with Stephen once and had gotten killed there. But luckily, Stephen had revived him just in time with his one-use diamond powers. Greg didn't know much about him personally, other than the fact that he used to work at the Big Donut, but he did know that he knew Stephen a little more closely after that event. Right now, though, the pink-hued teen came to a stop next to Greg, with Lion by his side. The animal was in a similar pink shade to the teen, having been revived by Stephen's mother a millennia ago. His head was under Lars's hand, which was absent-mindedly stroking his ear as he looked on to the shadowing figure of Stephen with a confused frown. "He used to be just the annoying little kid who bought donuts for me," Lars continued. "And after that, he was the annoying little kid who saved my life, and then the annoying little kid who was so sad about me leaving Beach City that his big dumb heart decided to try and make me stay. I just don't get it. How did..." He didn't seem to know how to put his thoughts into words, so Greg did it for him. How did sweet little Stephen turn into that? He lowered his gaze, guilt weighing on his shoulders like lead, saying, "I'm always left out on this stuff, but how did I miss something as big as this? How did I not see it coming?" He tightened his teeth, stepping forwards hesitantly, not being able to work out the frustration. "That's my son! When did this happen? How did I mess up this badly? How was I not there to help him through this?" There was a silence as Greg shifted back again, his hands resigning to squeeze together in front of him, not knowing where to go. "This must be really hard for you," Lars finally said, his words a bit awkward but his heart in the right place. "But don't worry, man. Whatever you tried was probably the best you could have done. This is gem stuff. There was nothing you could do." "But there was," Greg muttered. "There really was." He opened his palms, the memories feeling like buffeting people in a crowd. "My problem isn't that I'm a gem. My problem is that I'm a universe! Stephen, where have you been? Don't touch me!" "I love you, Stewball. I'm glad you're back. Please don't do that again. Your old man can't take that sort of stuff." "Look, just if you need to tell me something, I'll listen, all right?" "There's nothing to listen to. Everything's fine." "No, it's clearly not." Greg didn't do enough. "That wasn't gem stuff," he said slowly. "I know what that looks like, because when I see gem stuff, I don't understand it. But this, I understood." He looked towards Lars, tearing his eyes away from his hands, every nerve shivering from regret. "I understood that something was wrong with my son. I understood that he wasn't acting like himself at all. I understood that he wasn't as fine as he said he was. But I just ignored it. Why did I ignore it? Why didn't I try harder? Why wasn't I more than just his sad old human dad who lives in a van?" Greg was interrupted as Lion rumbled quietly, nosing aside sympathetically. The pink animal curled up next to him, staring up at him with huge magenta eyes, as if he was trying to comfort the old man. Lars didn't seem to know what to say. Greg didn't expect him to know either. Nobody would know what to say in this situation. The pink teen just patted the older man's shoulder, saying, "We'll get him back. Then you can say sorry to him in person. Don't worry, he'll forgive you like it's nothing, trust me. It'll be forgiving himself that he gets stuck on." "Excuse me, Lars?" A voice distracted them both, making Lion jump, and the two humans glanced behind them to see two other people running up to where they were. It was Connie's mom and dad. The mom had her dark hair, dark eyes, dark skin, an aged-up version of her daughter. The dad was thin and lighter, with glasses that were now cracked in one lens, and short black hair. The worried looks on their faces immediately let Greg know what they were concerned about. "Yeah?" Lars answered. Did you find Connie yet?" the mom asked frantically, stopping with the phone still clutched in her hands. Lars shook his head regretfully. "Oh, no, I didn't see her. You haven't found her here?" "No," the dad shook his head. "Not even on the ship." Uh-oh. Greg knew why they couldn't find Connie, but he also knew how hard it would be to break the news to them. His gaze drifted guiltily towards the silhouette of his son in the distance. But it wasn't just his son. It was also the unlucky girl who had presumably tried to help him and had instead gotten stuck with him. Still, they deserved to know. If Greg couldn't find Stephen, he would want to know where he was, no matter what state he was in. I know where Connie is, he offered slowly, his mind cranking to try and figure out how to tell the petrified parents what had happened. The mom and dad jumped towards him like a lifeline, desperation tearing in their eyes as they yelled, "Oh, thank goodness! Where is she? Is she safe?" He could see the faint pieces of hope that had bloomed up in them, and he felt horrible to be the one to squash them down. He decided to be as straightforward as possible. "You might need to sit down for this. I mean, I know that I would need to sit down, so..." The two parents, even more afraid now, did as they were told, settling down under the grass with paling faces. Greg crouched down with them, sighing deeply. He pointed to the horizon where his son was, and said as fast as he could get the sentence out, "Stephen was corrupted into a monster, and Connie was fused of him into a sort of Stevani when that happened. She's over there now." They looked like he broke them with those words. The parents glanced back and forth between Greg and Stephen, so stunned that they couldn't speak. Finally, the father bent his head down into his hands, a rogue sob escaping him. The dad finally looked back up, his reddened eyes back on Greg, saying, I'm so sorry, Greg. Your son is in there too?" He nodded, trying not to break down as well. He had to be supportive. "Yeah, but we can fix him. We can get him and your daughter back. Corruption isn't uncurable anymore. Stephen and Connie will be fine, right after the gems think of a real plan." The mother was gazing down at her phone, a swirl of toughening emotions blocking up her features as she read the text messages over and over again. When the doctor looked up again, her face was clenched in fury, yelling at him in a sharp outburst. "This is your fault, universe! You were there at the hospital! You saw how traumatized that poor boy was! I told you to take him to a psychiatrist! I told you he needed serious help as soon as possible!" I tried to help, Greg began, not even sure if he disagreed with her. I was talking to him, and we went for a drive and stuff. He said he was fine. I thought he was telling the truth. "You went for a drive? Are you kidding me? Do you really think that going for a drive will undo years and years of childhood trauma?" She stomped a foot close to him, making him jump and scoop back, yelling, "Do you not understand how serious this is? Your son is mentally ill. And I get how some parents don't want to accept that they messed their kid up, but nothing this severe could be fixed by a drive." The angry doctor was heaving from rage, looking like she wanted to say 1,000 more things to him, only stopped by her husband, who had leaped to her side and was holding her back like he thought that she'd pummel Greg if he didn't. Hang on, sweetie. I'm sure he didn't mean to do this," the father began carefully with a nervous glance to the hulking pink lion, wincing under the wrathful glare of his wife. "Greg has suffered enough already, hasn't he? All of us have." "Yes, but we wouldn't have needed to if people just paid attention more." The mother sighed in exasperation and said, "This is why stuff like this happens. People just hope it goes away, they laugh it off, and it only gets worse." Okay, I get it!" Greg cut her off, nearly knocking Lars over as he backed up even further from her, away from Lion's protection. Guilt seared inside of him like a white-hot rod as he yelled, "I already know I'm a terrible father! You don't have to keep saying it! I was ignorant and stupid and blind to what was happening to him. I shouldn't have taken his word for it. I should have said something more than just, 'I'm here.'" He gripped his scalp, pacing back and forth from the stress. "He went missing before I could do anything right, and even when I got him back, I took 'I'm fine' as an answer. I thought he just needed space, but I shouldn't have believed him so easily. I should have. He had gotten so choked up that he could no longer speak. He just fell down on the ground, his head in his hands, wanting to bash his own head in from how dumb he'd been. Hey, come on. Beating yourself up won't help one bit, okay?" Lars began, trying to break up the tension. "Everyone played a part in this, all right? Garnet, Amethyst, Pearl, the Diamonds, you, me, even Stephen for avoiding you for so long. We could spend all night pointing fingers, but it won't change the fact that he and Connie are corrupted together, and we need to save them. It doesn't matter whose fault it is right now, all right? It already happened. We just gotta deal with it and then fix it." He stood up, saying, "So don't waste your breath arguing. Just apologize and keep working to do better next time." His gaze lifted towards the diamonds. White, yellow, and blue were watching the citizens bustle about. The homeschool students were helping where they could, directed mostly by Lars's crew. The crystal gems were scattered. Amethyst was walking off by herself. Pearl was nowhere to be found. Ruby was still trying to ground Sapphire. Bismuth, Lapis, and Peridot didn't look like they'd returned yet. Lars began to head towards Ruby and Sapphire, calling back to them, "I'm gonna go see if I can get the crystal gems together and make a plan. We need to do this as quickly as possible. We don't have food for the humans, and the longer Steven and Connie are like that, the more damage we need to repair once we get back. Miss, please don't strangle Greg while I'm gone." The angry doctor slumped her shoulders, nodding, her eyes still swirling pools of a storm. Greg watched the pink teen leave, wiping at his face, feeling pretty pathetic in every way. Lion padded over to where he was, pushing his nose into his hand again. Greg petted the lion's soft mane, his thoughts floating far away from where he stood. All he could think about was Steven, how he wished he could have been a better dad somehow. He turned his gaze back to the horizon as he dragged himself up to stand again, his arms hugging around his body like he was cold. His son was crying, scared and lost, with nobody around to help him. But Greg could only watch.